At the family barbecue, my son said, "You're the reason Dad was miserable." Everyone agreed, except me. I just smiled. The next day, I moved out immediately, and when the lawyer delivered the letter, they all went into a panic. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it really started, because the truth is always more complicated than it seems. My name is Patricia, and I'm 59 years old. For the past 35 years, I believed I was building a loving family. I was wrong. What I was actually doing was enabling a system that would eventually turn my own children against me. The barbecue was supposed to be a celebration of my 60th birthday, even though it was still 2 months away. Mark, my 34-year-old son, had insisted on throwing this party. His wife Stephanie had been the one pushing for it, claiming it would be so meaningful to gather everyone together. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. I should have known better. Stephanie never did anything without an agenda. I spent the morning preparing potato salad and marinating chicken, just like I had done for countless family gatherings over the years. The familiar routine felt comforting, but there was something different in the air that day. Maybe it was the way Mark had been distant on the phone lately, or how my daughter Kelly had been short with me during our last conversation. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The first guests to arrive were Mark and Stephanie. She walked into my kitchen wearing a perfectly pressed sundress, her blonde hair styled in loose waves that probably took an hour to achieve. She kissed my cheek with practiced warmth, but her eyes remained cold. "Patricia, you look tired," she said, examining my face with fake concern. "Are you taking care of yourself?" I was wearing my favorite blue blouse and had spent 20 minutes on my makeup, but somehow Stephanie always managed to make me feel underdressed and inadequate. "I'm fine, thank you. Just busy getting everything ready." Mark barely looked at me as he carried a cooler of beer to the backyard. There was no "happy early birthday, Mom" or "thanks for hosting," just the mechanical movements of someone fulfilling an obligation. Kelly arrived 15 minutes later with her boyfriend James. My daughter had always been my baby, the one who called me every week and remembered my favorite flowers. But lately, even those calls had become shorter, more distant. She hugged me, but it felt different somehow, like she was going through the motions. "Mom, we need to talk later," Kelly said quietly, as she helped me carry plates outside. "About some things." My stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" She glanced toward Stephanie, who was arranging lawn chairs with theatrical precision. "Just some things Stephanie helped me understand about Dad." Dad. My ex-husband, Robert, who had died 3 years ago from a heart attack. What could there possibly be to understand about him that I didn't already know after 28 years of marriage? As the afternoon wore on, I noticed how my family had naturally divided into 2 groups. On one side were Mark, Stephanie, and Kelly, huddled together near the grill, speaking in low voices and occasionally glancing my way. On the other side was me, bustling around, making sure everyone had enough to eat and drink, playing the role of the perfect hostess while feeling increasingly like an outsider at my own party. The conversation at dinner started innocently enough. Mark was talking about work, Kelly was sharing updates about her new job, and Stephanie was nodding along with the practiced interest of someone who had heard these stories before. But then Stephanie steered the conversation in a direction that made my blood run cold. "You know, Patricia," she said, setting down her fork and looking directly at me. "Mark and I have been talking a lot about family dynamics lately, about how patterns from our childhood affect our relationships as adults." I felt every muscle in my body tense. "What do you mean?" "Well, for instance, the way you and Robert used to fight. Mark has shared some memories with me about how tense things were in this house when he was growing up." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but he didn't contradict her. Kelly was staring at her plate, refusing to meet my eyes. "Robert and I had our disagreements. Like any married couple," I said carefully. "But we always worked things out." Stephanie let out a soft laugh that made my skin crawl. "Did you, though? Because from what Mark has told me, you were always criticizing Robert, always finding fault with him. The poor man could never do anything right in your eyes." I looked at Mark, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his wife that she was wrong. Instead, he took a long sip of his beer and said nothing. "That's not true," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "Your father and I loved each other very much. Yes, we had our problems, but every marriage does." "Mom," Kelly said quietly, still not looking at me, "Stephanie showed me some things, some patterns, the way you always had to have the last word, the way you made Dad feel small." "Made him feel small?" I stared at my daughter in disbelief. "Kelly, what are you talking about? I supported your father in everything he did. I worked 2 jobs to help him through his master's degree. I took care of this house, raised you kids, and never once complained when he spent weekends golfing instead of helping with household chores." "See?" Stephanie said, leaning forward with triumph in her voice. "You're doing it right now. making a list of everything you did for him like he owed you something. Like your love came with conditions. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to respond, but Mark finally spoke up, and his words shattered what was left of my composure. Mom, you have to face the truth. You're the reason Dad was miserable. You criticized him constantly. You never let him just be himself. Even now, 3 years after he's gone, you still can't admit that you made his life harder than it needed to be. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the table at these people I had devoted my life to, waiting for someone to defend me, to say that Mark was wrong. Instead, I saw Kelly nodding slightly, James staring at his hands, and Stephanie wearing a satisfied smile that she didn't even bother to hide. Something inside me broke in that moment. Not my heart exactly, but something deeper. The last thread of hope that my family truly knew who I was, that they understood the sacrifices I had made, the love I had given freely and without conditions. I set down my napkin very carefully and looked directly at my son. You really believe that? I believe the truth, Mom. And the truth is that you made Dad's life miserable with your constant nagging and criticism. Stephanie helped me see that. Of course she did. I looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had entered our family 5 years ago and somehow convinced my children that their mother was the villain in their story. She met my gaze with cool satisfaction, like a chess player who had just announced checkmate. I stood up slowly, feeling older than my 59 years. I see. Mom, don't be dramatic, Kelly said, finally looking at me. We're just trying to help you understand why your relationships are so difficult, why you're always alone. Always alone. The words echoed in my head as I looked at these people sitting around my dining room table, eating food I had prepared, celebrating my birthday by telling me what a terrible person I was. And then, something remarkable happened. Instead of crying, instead of defending myself, instead of begging them to see my side of the story, I smiled. A genuine, peaceful smile that seemed to unnerve all of them. You know what? I said, my voice steady and calm. You're absolutely right. I have been difficult. I have been making everyone's life harder. But I'm going to fix that problem right now. I walked into the kitchen, leaving them sitting there in confused silence. I could hear Stephanie whispering urgently to Mark, probably trying to figure out if her plan had worked too well. But I wasn't breaking down like she expected. I was doing something she never could have anticipated. I was finally seeing clearly for the first time in years. As I stood in my kitchen, looking out at the backyard where I had hosted dozens of family gatherings, I realized that I had been living in a carefully constructed illusion. But now the mask had fallen away, and I could see the truth about what my family had become. The question wasn't why they thought I was the problem. The question was why I had believed them for so long. Standing in my kitchen that evening, listening to the murmur of voices from the dining room, I made a decision that would change everything. But first, I needed to understand exactly how we had gotten to this point. While they continued their discussion about my character flaws, I quietly moved to my bedroom and opened the drawer of my nightstand. Inside was a small digital recorder I had purchased 3 months ago, along with a notebook filled with dates and observations. I wasn't proud of what I had been doing, but Stephanie's behavior had become so manipulative that I felt I had no choice. It started 4 months ago during a family dinner. I had made Robert's favorite pot roast, the same recipe I had used throughout our marriage. Stephanie took one bite and made a face. "Oh, Patricia, this is so heavy," she said, pushing her plate away slightly. No wonder Robert struggled with his weight. "Mark, honey, we really need to watch our sodium intake." Mark immediately stopped eating. "You're right. Mom, maybe you could try some healthier recipes." I felt a sting of hurt, but I smiled and said I would look into it. Later, as I was cleaning up, I overheard Stephanie talking to Kelly in the living room. "Your mom means well, but she really doesn't understand modern nutrition. It's probably why your dad had heart problems. All that heavy, salty food for decades." Kelly's voice was uncertain. "I don't know, Steph. Mom's always been a good cook." "Oh, I'm not saying she's a bad person," Stephanie replied quickly, "but sometimes we enable the people we love without realizing it. Your mom probably thought she was showing love through food, but really she was contributing to your father's health problems." I stood frozen in my kitchen, dish towel in hand, as my daughter-in-law systematically reframed 30 years of my marriage. According to Stephanie, my home-cooked meals weren't expressions of love. They were weapons that slowly killed my husband. That was the first time I really paid attention to how Stephanie operated. She never said anything directly cruel. She always prefaced her poison with phrases like, "I'm not saying," or "I know she means well, but." She was too smart to be openly hostile. Instead, she planted seeds of doubt and let them grow. After that dinner, I started noticing the pattern. During every family gathering, Stephanie would find subtle ways to undermine me. She would compliment me in ways that felt like insults. "Patricia, you're so lucky you don't have to worry about your figure anymore." Or, "It's sweet how you still decorate the same way you did in the 80s. But it wasn't just the passive-aggressive comments. It was the way she positioned herself as the family's new emotional center. Whenever Mark or Kelly had a problem, they went to Stephanie first. She became their confidant, their advisor, their interpreter of family dynamics. I watched helplessly as my children began seeing me through Stephanie's eyes. Suddenly, my advice was outdated. My concerns were overreactions. My attempts to stay close to my kids were labeled as clingy or controlling. The breaking point came 2 months ago during Kelly's birthday dinner. I had offered to host, but Stephanie suggested they have it at a restaurant instead. "It would be easier for Patricia," she explained to Mark. "She's been so stressed lately." I hadn't been stressed, but somehow by the end of that conversation, everyone believed I was overwhelmed and needed to be relieved of hosting duties. This was how Stephanie worked, creating problems that didn't exist and then solving them in ways that conveniently served her agenda. At Kelly's birthday dinner, I sat at the end of the table watching Stephanie orchestrate the entire evening. She had chosen the restaurant, ordered wine for the table, and somehow positioned herself next to Kelly while I sat between James and an empty chair. During dessert, Kelly mentioned that she was having problems with her apartment's management company. Before I could offer advice, Stephanie jumped in. "You know what your problem is, Kelly? You're too nice, just like your dad was. Some people take advantage of kindness." She glanced meaningfully at me. "Your father was the same way, always putting other people's needs first, even when it hurt him." Mark nodded knowingly. Dad was definitely a people-pleaser, sometimes to his own detriment. I felt like I was watching my husband's memory being rewritten in real time. Robert hadn't been a people-pleaser. He had been stubborn and set in his ways. He certainly hadn't put my needs first very often, but somehow, in Stephanie's version of events, he was a saint who had been taken advantage of by his selfish wife. That night, I went home and ordered the digital recorder online. I told myself I just needed to understand what was happening. I needed evidence of these conversations so I could make sense of how my family's perception of me had changed so dramatically. I started recording family dinners, phone calls, any interaction where Stephanie was present. What I discovered was worse than I had imagined. Stephanie wasn't just undermining me passively, she was actively coaching my children on how to see me. During one recorded conversation with Kelly, she said, "Have you ever noticed how your mom always has to be the center of attention? Even at your dad's funeral, she made it about her grief instead of celebrating his life." This was a complete fabrication. At Robert's funeral, I had been so overwhelmed with loss that I could barely speak. Kelly had been the one who delivered the eulogy because I was too emotional. But Stephanie was reframing my grief as narcissism. In another recording, I heard her telling Mark, "Your mom called 3 times this week. Don't you think that's a bit much? I worry that she's becoming dependent on you emotionally since your dad died." 3 phone calls in a week to my son was apparently evidence of unhealthy dependence. But Stephanie called her own mother twice a day, and that was perfectly normal. The most damaging recording was from last month. I had invited Kelly over for lunch, just the 2 of us. Afterward, Kelly called Stephanie to debrief, and I heard every word. "Mom seemed really bitter today," Kelly said. "She kept talking about Dad like he wasn't perfect, bringing up old arguments they used to have." "Oh, honey," Stephanie's voice was full of fake sympathy. "She's been doing that more and more lately. I think she's trying to rewrite history to make herself feel better about how she treated him. It's actually a form of psychological manipulation." I hadn't been bitter or manipulative. I had simply shared some honest memories of my marriage with my daughter. Robert and I had loved each other, but we weren't perfect. We had arguments about money, about parenting, about his habit of leaving dishes in the sink. Normal marriage stuff. But Stephanie was teaching Kelly to interpret any criticism of Robert as evidence of my character flaws. As I listened to these recordings over the past 3 months, I began to understand that I was dealing with someone far more dangerous than I had realized. Stephanie wasn't just difficult or opinionated. She was systematically isolating me from my own children by controlling the narrative about who I was and what my marriage had been like. She was gaslighting my entire family, and they didn't even know it was happening. Now, as I sat in my bedroom listening to them continue their birthday intervention downstairs, I realized that tonight's ambush had been carefully planned. Stephanie had spent months preparing my children for this moment, planting doubts about my character and my treatment of their father. The accusation that I had made Robert miserable wasn't spontaneous. It was the culmination of a long campaign to position me as the family villain so that Stephanie could step into the role of wise advisor and emotional leader. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated me. I opened my laptop and began transferring the audio files to a secure folder. Every conversation, every manipulation, every lie was documented. Stephanie thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Tomorrow, I would begin phase 2 of a plan I hadn't even known I was making. But tonight, I would let them think they had won. Let them believe that their intervention had broken me. Because the truth was about to set us all free, whether they wanted it or not. The next morning, I woke up feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Clarity. For the first time since Stephanie had entered our family, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, organizing the audio files I had collected. 3 months of recordings, dozens of conversations that revealed the systematic campaign to turn my children against me. As I listened to them again with fresh ears, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. My phone had been buzzing since 7 a.m. Text messages from Kelly asking if I was okay, voicemails from Mark saying they needed to talk. Even James had sent a message apologizing for the tension at dinner. But nothing from Stephanie. She was probably waiting to see how her manipulation would play out. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I sent a group text to Mark, Kelly, and James. Family meeting tonight at 6 p.m. My house. There are things you need to hear. Mark called within minutes. Mom, about last night, maybe we were too harsh. Were you? I asked calmly. Well, we could have approached it differently. But the concerns are still valid. We just want to help you understand why your relationships are difficult. There it was again. The assumption that I was the problem, that I needed their help to understand my own life. Mark, I want you to come tonight. All of you. There's something I need to show you. What kind of something? You'll see. Just be here at 6. I spent the day preparing for what would either be the end of my relationship with my children or the beginning of their awakening to what Stephanie really was. I connected my laptop to the television, created a presentation with timestamps and context for each recording, and organized everything chronologically so they could see how the manipulation had escalated over time. At 5:45, I heard cars in the driveway. Through the window, I saw Mark and Stephanie getting out of their BMW, followed by Kelly and James in her Honda. They walked up to my front door together, a united front coming to deal with their problematic mother. I opened the door before they could knock. Come in, we have a lot to discuss. They filed into my living room, their expressions ranging from cautious to concerned. Stephanie took a seat on the couch and crossed her legs, looking perfectly composed. She was wearing a soft pink sweater that made her look innocent and approachable. Everything about her appearance was calculated. Mom, Kelly started, I hope you're not upset about last night. We were just trying to help. I know exactly what you were trying to do, I said, walking to the front of the room where I could see all of them. But before we continue this conversation, I need you to hear something. I picked up a small device from the coffee table. This is a digital recorder. Over the past 3 months, I've been documenting conversations that I felt might be important later. I want you to listen to some of those recordings now. Mark frowned. Mom, that's kind of weird. Why were you recording us? Because I needed to understand how my own children could suddenly see me as such a terrible person. I needed to figure out what had changed. I looked directly at Stephanie, or rather, who had changed things. Stephanie's expression didn't shift, but I saw her hands tighten slightly in her lap. Patricia, I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm about to prove it. I pressed play on the first recording. Stephanie's voice filled the room. Have you ever noticed how your mom always has to be the center of attention? Even at your dad's funeral, she made it about her grief instead of celebrating his life. Kelly's face went pale. When did you record this? 3 weeks ago. You called Stephanie after we had lunch together. I paused the recording. Kelly, do you remember what actually happened at your father's funeral? You were really upset. You could barely speak. I gave the eulogy because you were too emotional. Exactly. But according to Stephanie, my grief was actually narcissism. I looked at my daughter-in-law. Would you like to explain that interpretation? Stephanie shifted uncomfortably. I think you're taking that out of context, Patricia. Kelly was struggling with her own grief, and I was just trying to help her process it. By telling her that her mother's grief was selfish, I clicked to the next recording. This time it was Stephanie talking to Mark. Your mom called 3 times this week. Don't you think that's a bit much? I worry that she's becoming dependent on you emotionally since your dad died. Mark looked confused. But Mom, 3 calls a week isn't that much. That's what I thought too, I said. But apparently it's evidence of unhealthy dependence. Stephanie, how often do you call your mother? That's different, she said quickly. My mother and I have always been close. You call her twice a day, I continued. I know because Mark mentioned it once, but when I call my son 3 times in 7 days, it's problematic behavior that needs to be discussed and analyzed. I played the next recording, then the next. With each audio clip, I watched my children's faces change. Confusion gave way to recognition, then to something that looked like horror. The most damaging recording came last. It was from 2 weeks ago, a conversation between Stephanie and Kelly that I had accidentally captured when Kelly called while the recorder was still running from an earlier family dinner. Stephanie's voice was clear and calculating. I know this is hard to hear, but your mom has always been manipulative. She just hides it better than most people. The way she guilt trips your dad, the way she makes everything about her feelings. It's actually a form of emotional abuse. Kelly gasped. Kelly. Oh my God. I said those things about dad being manipulated because you told me mom was manipulative. Kelly, Stephanie said quickly, you're misunderstanding the context of that conversation. No, Mark said, his voice quiet but firm. I'm starting to understand the context perfectly. He looked at his wife with something I hadn't seen before, suspicion. Steph, you've been feeding us information about mom for months, making us see her differently. Stephanie stood up, her composure finally cracking. I was trying to help you understand unhealthy family dynamics. Your mother has patterns of behavior that aren't healthy. According to who? I asked. You've been in this family for 5 years. I've been Robert's wife for 28 years and these kids' mother for 34 years. But somehow you know more about our family dynamics than we do. I have a psychology degree, Stephanie said defensively. You have a bachelor's degree in psychology from a state school, I corrected. That doesn't make you qualified to diagnose me or rewrite the history of my marriage. James, who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke up. This is really messed up, Stephanie. You basically convinced them their mom was abusive. I never used that word, Stephanie protested. You used the phrase emotional abuse, Kelly said, her voice shaking. I heard it on the recording. You said mom emotionally abused dad. I walked over to my laptop and brought up a document I had prepared. I also did some research on your first marriage, Stephanie. The color drained from her face. That's private. Your ex-husband's name is David Chen. I found him on social media, and we had a very interesting phone conversation yesterday. I looked at Mark. Did you know that Stephanie convinced David to cut contact with his parents during their marriage? She told him they were toxic and manipulative. Mark stared at his wife. Is that true? David's parents never liked me, Stephanie said. They were controlling and judgmental. According to David, they were loving people who were concerned about how quickly you isolated him from his friends and family. Sound familiar? I could see the pieces falling into place in Mark's mind. Mom, when's the last time I hung out with my college friends? I don't think you've seen them since you married Stephanie. She said they were immature, that I needed to focus on building a more sophisticated social circle. Mark turned to his wife. You said the same thing about Mom, that she was holding me back from growing as a person. Stephanie was backing toward the door now, her mask completely fallen away. You're all turning against me because of some out-of-context recordings. This is exactly the kind of family drama I was trying to protect Mark from. No, Kelly said, standing up. You were creating the drama. You made us believe our mother was the problem when really it was you all along. I felt a surge of relief as I watched my daughter finally see the truth, but I wasn't finished yet. There's one more thing, I said, clicking to the final audio file. This is from last week when you thought no one could hear you. Stephanie's voice came through the speakers, clearer than ever. I give it 6 more months before Patricia is completely isolated. Once Mark and Kelly stop visiting her regularly, she'll either have to change her behavior or accept that she's alone. Either way, I won't have to deal with her interference in my marriage anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark stood up slowly, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. You planned this, he said to his wife. You systematically turned us against our mother so you could have more control over me. Stephanie's eyes darted around the room, looking for any ally, any escape from the truth that was closing in on her. But there was nowhere to run. The mask had finally fallen completely away, and we could all see who she really was. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Mark stood frozen, staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. Kelly had tears in her eyes, and James looked like he wanted to disappear into the couch. But Stephanie wasn't finished fighting. You're all overreacting, she said, her voice sharp now that the sweet facade was gone. Every family has issues. I was just trying to help Mark see some patterns that weren't healthy. By lying about what happened at Dad's funeral, Kelly's voice was thick with emotion. By making us think Mom was manipulative when really it was you. I never lied about anything. Stephanie shot back. I shared my observations. If you interpreted them a certain way, that's not my fault. I had been waiting for this moment when Stephanie would reveal her true nature. I walked to my laptop and opened another folder. Since we're talking about patterns and observations, let me share some of mine. I had spent hours the night before researching Stephanie's past, making phone calls and piecing together a picture that none of us had bothered to look at before. When Mark brought her home 5 years ago, we had been so happy that he had found someone that we never questioned who she really was. David Chen wasn't your first husband, was he, Stephanie? Her face went white. That's none of your business. Actually, when you're systematically destroying my relationship with my children, it becomes my business. I looked at Mark. Your wife was married before David, to a man named Michael Torres. They divorced after 18 months. Mark turned to Stephanie. You told me David was your first marriage. It was just a brief thing with Michael. It barely counted. According to Michael, you convinced him to quit his job and move across the country with you to be closer to your family. Then, once you had him isolated from his support system, you started finding fault with everything he did. He said living with you was like walking on eggshells. Stephanie laughed, but it sounded forced. Michael was weak. He couldn't handle being with a strong woman. Is that what you told David too? Because he said the exact same thing happened with him. You moved him away from his friends and family, then slowly convinced him that they were toxic influences on his life. I could see Mark processing this information, connecting dots he had never noticed before. Steph, you did suggest we move to the other side of town after we got married. You said it would be good for us to have our own space. Most couples want privacy when they're newlyweds, Stephanie said defensively. But then you started saying my friends were immature, that mom was too needy, that my work colleagues were negative influences. Mark's voice was getting stronger as he spoke. You isolated me from everyone, just like you did with your other husbands. I was protecting you from people who don't understand our relationship. Kelly stood up, her hands shaking. No, you were controlling him, just like you tried to control how we saw mom. She turned to me. I'm so sorry. I can't believe I let her convince me that you were the problem. I felt a surge of love for my daughter, but I wasn't ready to let Stephanie off the hook yet. There's more. Michael told me something very interesting about how your marriage ended. Stephanie was backing toward the door again. I don't have to listen to this. He said you started an emotional affair with David while you were still married to him. You convinced David that Michael was abusive and that you needed rescuing. Mark's face went pale. Is that true? Michael was emotionally unavailable, Stephanie said. David understood me in ways that Michael never could. So you cheated, Mark said flatly. I formed a connection with someone who appreciated me. I watched as the final pieces of Stephanie's character came into focus for my son. Mark, do you remember when you first met Stephanie? Where was it? At a coffee shop near my office. She was having a fight with some guy on the phone. Mark's eyes widened as he realized what he was saying. She told me it was her ex-boyfriend who wouldn't leave her alone. That was David, I said gently. She was still married to him when she met you. The silence that followed was crushing. Mark sat down heavily, his head in his hands. She was cheating on David with me and I didn't even know it. You were her next target, James said quietly. She found a new victim before she finished destroying the old one. Stephanie's mask was completely gone now. The sweet, concerned daughter-in-law had been replaced by someone cold and calculating. You think you're so smart, Patricia, but you're missing the most important thing. What's that? Mark chose me. Even after everything you've said tonight, he's still going to choose me because I'm his wife, and you're just his bitter, lonely mother who can't accept that her son has moved on. It was a desperate last attack, designed to make Mark feel guilty for even questioning her, but it backfired spectacularly. Mark looked up at his wife with an expression I had never seen before, complete disgust. No, Stephanie, I'm not choosing you. Not anymore. Mark, you're being manipulated by your mother right now. Can't you see that? She's turning you against me with lies and out-of-context recordings. The recordings are your own words, Kelly said. Your own voice saying that you wanted to isolate our mother. And the information about your previous marriages came from your ex-husbands directly, I added. Michael was very grateful to talk to someone who understood what he went through. He said he'd been hoping for years that David would reach out to him so they could compare notes. Stephanie's composure finally cracked completely. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I tried to protect Mark from your toxic influence. Yes, I helped Kelly see that her relationship with you wasn't healthy. Because you are exactly what I said you are. A manipulative, needy woman who can't let her children live their own lives. And what does that make you? Mark asked, standing up. Someone who lies about her past, isolates people from their families, and systematically destroys relationships for fun? Someone who tried to save this family from dysfunction. By creating more dysfunction? Kelly was crying now. By making us hate our own mother, I walked over to my daughter and put my arm around her. You never hated me, sweetheart. You were just confused by someone who's very good at confusing people. Stephanie looked around the room one last time, seeing that she had lost completely. You'll regret this, Mark. When you realize what kind of woman your mother really is, you'll come back to me. But I might not be available anymore. Mark looked at her with something that might have been pity. No, Stephanie, I won't come back, because now I know what kind of woman you really are. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. This isn't over. Yes, it is, I said calmly. It's been over since the moment you decided to turn my children against me. You just didn't know it yet. After she left, the three of them sat in my living room in stunned silence. Mark was staring at the floor, Kelly was wiping tears from her cheeks, and James looked like he had just witnessed a car accident. Finally, Mark spoke. Mom, I don't even know where to start apologizing. You don't need to apologize for being manipulated by an expert. But I should have seen it. I should have known that someone who really loved me wouldn't try to isolate me from my family. Kelly reached for my hand. How did you know? How did you figure out what she was doing? I smiled sadly. Because I've been your mother for 30 years. I know you both better than anyone, and I knew that the people who accused me of being manipulative weren't really my children. They were Stephanie's version of my children. As we sat there talking through what had happened, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. My family was coming back to me, and the person who had tried to destroy us was gone. But I also knew that Stephanie's threat wasn't empty. She wouldn't go quietly into the night. She would try one more time to salvage her control over Mark. I just hoped that when she did, my son would be strong enough to resist her. For 3 days after the confrontation, I didn't hear from Mark. Kelly called twice to check on me and to apologize again for believing Stephanie's lies. James even stopped by with flowers and a heartfelt apology for not speaking up sooner. But Mark was radio silent, and I knew exactly what that meant. Stephanie was making her final play. On Thursday morning, Kelly called me crying. Mom, I just talked to Mark. Stephanie convinced him to go to couples counseling. She told him that you manipulated all of us into turning against her. My heart sank, but I wasn't entirely surprised. 5 years of emotional manipulation doesn't disappear overnight, especially when the manipulator is fighting for her survival. What did Mark say? He said he's confused, that maybe there are 2 sides to every story and he needs professional help to sort through it all. Kelly's voice was shaking with frustration. Mom, how can he not see what she did to us? I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. Because she's very good at what she does, sweetheart. And because Mark loves her, or at least he loves who he thought she was. But the recordings, the evidence about her past marriages, she'll have explanations for all of it. She'll say the recordings were taken out of context, that her ex-husbands are lying, that I orchestrated everything to break up her marriage. I rubbed my temples, feeling a familiar headache coming on. She's probably telling him right now that this is exactly what toxic mothers do, turn families against the wives of their sons. That afternoon, Mark finally called. His voice was strained and tired. Mom, I need some time to think. I understand. Stephanie says you've been planning this for months, that you deliberately recorded conversations to make her look bad. I closed my eyes. Mark, do you remember why I started recording those conversations? It was because I couldn't understand how my own children suddenly saw me as such a terrible person. I was trying to figure out what I had done wrong, but you admit you were spying on us. I was trying to understand what was happening to my family. I took a deep breath. Mark, I need you to think about something. Before Stephanie, when was the last time you thought I was manipulative or controlling? A long pause. I don't know. It was never, wasn't it? You never had those concerns about me until Stephanie started pointing out all these patterns that supposedly existed. Maybe I just wasn't aware of them before. Or maybe they didn't exist until someone needed them to exist. Another pause. Longer this time. Mom, I'm going to couples counseling with Stephanie. We need professional help to work through this. What kind of counselor? Someone Stephanie found. A specialist in family dysfunction and toxic relationships. My heart sank further. Of course, Stephanie had chosen the counselor. She would pick someone who would validate her narrative and pathologize my behavior. Mark, would you consider seeing someone neutral? Someone we choose together? Stephanie says that would compromise the process, that you would try to influence the choice. I could hear Stephanie's words coming out of my son's mouth, and it made me sick. Okay, do what you need to do. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling more alone than I had in years. Not because I was actually alone, but because I was watching my son walk back into the trap that I had worked so hard to free him from. Kelly came over that evening with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine. We ate in mostly silence, both of us processing what was happening. "I keep thinking about all the times I defended her," Kelly said finally. "All the times I took her side against you because I thought she was just trying to help. She was very convincing. But I should have known better. I should have trusted my own relationship with you instead of letting her reinterpret it for me." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You were being manipulated by an expert, Kelly. Don't blame yourself for that. Are you going to fight for Mark?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm going to be here when he needs me, but I can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved." The next week passed slowly. Kelly kept me updated on what she heard through family channels. Mark and Stephanie were attending counseling sessions 3 times a week. Stephanie had convinced the therapist that I was exhibiting narcissistic tendencies and that Mark needed to establish firm boundaries with me to protect his marriage. I tried to go about my normal routine, but it was hard to concentrate on anything. I had won the battle by exposing Stephanie's manipulation, but I was losing the war for my son's freedom. Then, on Friday afternoon, Mark showed up at my door. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled and his hair was disheveled. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let him into my kitchen. He sat down at the table where we had eaten so many meals together over the years, and I could see that something fundamental had changed. "The counselor wants to see you," he said without preamble. "Stephanie's counselor? Dr. Matthews. She says that family therapy is necessary to address the toxic dynamics that have been affecting our marriage." I felt a surge of anger. "So now I'm the one who needs therapy to fix your marriage?" Mark looked up at me, and for the first time in weeks, I saw doubt in his eyes. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think it's normal for a wife to schedule all of her husband's social activities?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Stephanie manages my calendar. She decides which work events I attend, which friends I see, what we do on weekends. I realized this week that I haven't made a social decision for myself in 3 years." I sat down across from him. "What made you notice that?" Dr. Matthews asked me to describe my daily routine, and I realized that nothing in my life is actually my choice. Stephanie decides what we eat, what we watch on TV, where we go on vacation, how we spend holidays. His voice was getting quieter. "She even picked out the clothes I'm wearing right now." I looked at his shirt and pants, both items I had never seen him wear before Stephanie. "Do you like those clothes?" "I don't know. I haven't thought about what I like in so long." He rubbed his face with his hands. "Mom, I think I made a terrible mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "Marrying someone who doesn't actually want a husband. She wants a pet." I felt a surge of hope, but I tried to keep my voice neutral. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Dr. Matthews says that my confusion is a result of your manipulation, and that I need to trust Stephanie's judgment because she has my best interests at heart. What do you think?" Mark was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "I think that someone who has my best interests at heart wouldn't try to isolate me from my mother." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You don't have to figure everything out right now, but Mark, I need you to know something." "What?" "No matter what happens with Stephanie, no matter what any counselor says about me, I will always be your mother. I will always love you, and I will always be here when you need me." He squeezed my hand. "Even after everything I said to you, even after I accused you of making Dad miserable, especially after that, because I know that wasn't really you talking." We sat there holding hands across my kitchen table, and I felt like I was getting my son back. Not completely, not yet, but enough to give me hope that Stephanie's hold on him was finally beginning to break. "Mom, can I stay here tonight? I need some space to think." "Of course. Your room is exactly the same as when you left for college." As I made up his bed that evening, I allowed myself to feel cautiously optimistic. Mark was starting to see the truth about his marriage. The question now was whether he would be strong enough to act on that truth, because I knew that Stephanie wasn't going to give up without one final, desperate fight. Mark stayed at my house for 3 days. During that time, he didn't answer Stephanie's calls or respond to her increasingly frantic text messages. He spent most of his time sitting in the backyard, thinking or helping me with small projects around the house. It was like watching him slowly remember who he was before Stephanie reshaped him. On Sunday morning, he finally made his decision. "I'm going to file for divorce," he said over breakfast. "I can't live like this anymore." I felt a mixture of relief and sadness for him. "Are you sure? I've been thinking about what you said, about how someone who really loves you wouldn't try to isolate you from your family. And I realized that Stephanie doesn't love me. She loves controlling me." That afternoon, Stephanie showed up at my door. I could see her BMW parked in the driveway, engine still running, as if she expected this to be a quick conversation. "Where is my husband?" she demanded the moment I opened the door. "He's not here." "Don't lie to me, Patricia. I know he's been staying here. This is exactly what I predicted would happen. You've manipulated him into leaving me." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. I didn't want Mark to have to deal with her manipulation again when he was just starting to break free. "Stephanie, Mark made his own choice. For the first time in 5 years, he made a decision that wasn't influenced by you. He's making a mistake. We have a good marriage. You have a good arrangement. You get to control everything, and he gets to pretend he's happy about it." Her facade finally cracked completely. "You bitter old woman. You couldn't stand that your son found someone better than you. Better than me. You turned my children against their own mother. You isolated my son from his friends and family. You lied about your past and manipulated everyone around you." I looked at her calmly. "I may have my flaws, Stephanie, but I'm not a predator. Mark will come back to me. He always does. Not this time." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating whether there was any way to salvage the situation. Finally, she seemed to realize that she had lost completely. "You have no idea what you've done," she said. "Mark will never be happy without me. I was the best thing that ever happened to him." "No," I said quietly. "The best thing that happened to him was finally seeing you for who you really are." She got back in her car and drove away. I never saw her again. Mark filed for divorce the following week. Stephanie tried to fight it, claiming that he was mentally unstable and being manipulated by his toxic mother. But Mark had found a good lawyer who helped him document the pattern of emotional abuse and isolation that had characterized their marriage. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Stephanie moved to another state, probably to find her next victim. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was already dating someone new, a recently divorced man with teenage children. During those 6 months, my relationship with Mark slowly healed. We had to rebuild trust and reestablish boundaries that had been destroyed by years of manipulation. But for the first time since he had married Stephanie, we could have honest conversations about our relationship and our family. Kelly and I grew closer too. She felt guilty for so long about believing Stephanie's lies, but eventually she forgave herself and focused on moving forward. She started seeing a therapist to help her understand how she had been manipulated, and she learned to trust her own instincts again. 1 year after that terrible birthday barbecue, we had another family gathering. This time it was genuinely celebratory. Mark had started dating a woman named Sarah, who actually liked his family and encouraged his relationship with us. Kelly had gotten engaged to James, who had proven himself to be a kind and honest man. As I watched my children laughing and talking around my dining room table, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not just the absence of conflict, but the deep satisfaction of having fought for my family and won. "Mom," Mark said during dessert, "I owe you an apology that I'll probably be making for the rest of my life." "You don't owe me anything, sweetheart. You were the victim in all of this. But I said terrible things to you. I accused you of making Dad miserable." I looked at my son, this man who had been through so much and come out stronger. "Mark, do you want to know what your father would say if he could see us now?" "What?" "He'd say that he's proud of you for having the courage to leave a bad marriage. He'd say that life is too short to spend it with someone who doesn't truly love you." I smiled. "And he'd probably ask when we're going to eat the rest of that chocolate cake." Everyone laughed, and I felt the last piece of healing fall into place. We were a family again. Not perfect, not without scars from what we had been through, but real and honest and strong. Later that evening, as I was cleaning up the kitchen, Kelly came up behind me and hugged me. "I'm sorry it took us so long to see what was happening," she said. "Sometimes we have to lose something to appreciate what we had. Did you ever doubt that we'd find our way back to each other?" I thought about the question seriously. There were moments when I wondered if Stephanie had damaged our relationships too much to repair, but deep down, I knew that the love we shared was stronger than her manipulation. "How did you stay so calm through it all?" "I would have been furious," I smiled, thinking about the woman I had become through this ordeal. "I learned something important, Kelly. You can't control what other people do to you, but you can control how you respond. I chose to respond with truth and patience instead of anger and retaliation. And it worked. It worked because our family was worth fighting for." As I turned off the lights and locked the door that night, I reflected on everything that had happened. A year ago, I had been a woman who was losing her children to a manipulator's lies. Tonight, I was a mother who had reclaimed her family through courage, patience, and an unwillingness to accept a false narrative about who I was. The mask had finally fallen away completely. Not just Stephanie's mask, but my own. I had stopped pretending to be the perfect mother who never made mistakes, and I had started being the real mother who loved her children enough to fight for them. And in the end, that had made all the difference.